They were right to fear me. Had they not taken my home of fire, I'd not have brought their fears to life.
You are hereby exiled.
Now I'm banished to Rayclast. But to me, one land is like any other. The elements are my allies, the dead are my servants.
Welcome to the channel, my name is Mageborn, and today I will be reviewing Path of Exile made by Grinding Gear Games. If you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing as it will really help the channel grow. Thank you.
What drives you, Exile? Is it justice? Revenge? Honor? No. It is power. Your limits will be tested. Break them. Do what is thought impossible.
Path of Exile's story is cut up into different parts, the first part being the campaign. Now, I do need to give a little backstory here. I have probably spent somewhere between 3,000 to 5,000 hours in Path of Exile across 3 different platforms: PC, PlayStation and Xbox. I have completed the campaign many times. Saying all that, I'm really not 100% sure on what the campaign story is. I probably paid attention the first couple of times through it, but that was years ago. Now I just skip much of the story as possible during the campaign. For me, the real Path of Exile starts at Endgame. Now, the Endgame does have its own story that has been unfolding as time passes, the War for the Atlas. It started with the Shaper and then the Elder and his Guardians. The Atlas is an endgame map system that I'll explain a little bit more later on. The story developed further when Conquerors of the Atlas was released. This storyline was interesting as it showed exiles, much like our own characters, defeating the Elder as we have done many times. But this time they become corrupted with the power and now we have to defeat those exiles. I was going to go into detail with each expansion and what it's changed in the endgame story, but I honestly think it'll just take too much time to summarise. There have been a number of 3 expansions that develop the overarching story of the Atlas of Worlds, and each time it introduces new bosses to fight and maps to explore. There is a lot of endgame story content available and lore to look up if you're into that.
The stars themselves will bear silent witness. How far will you bend before you break?
The graphics in Path of Exile have developed a lot over the years. The game does look really good nowadays. It is an isometric ARPG, so you don't always get the best look of your character, but the environments and the enemies all stand out. One issue a lot of players have had with the graphics is visual clarity. As there are so many skill effects or enemies on screen at once, it can be hard to see what's going on and to avoid damage. GGG have tried to address this, but so far I've not found any way of successfully fixing it. Path of Exile is a free-to-play game, and because of this there are a huge amount of cosmetic items available to buy in-game. This means that nearly every player you encounter will look different in some way. These cosmetic choices sometimes really show off the graphical potential of Path of Exile. Out of the majority of ARPGs on the market, Path of Exile is definitely one of the better ones graphically. The first thing Path of Exile has in regards to combat is a huge amount of choice. There will always be a set number of skills that are overpowered each league, but the majority of the skills in the game are viable, and this gives players hundreds, if not thousands, of different builds to try. Classes are not locked into certain skills as with other ARPGs. Instead, your class determines where you start in the passive tree. Don't worry, I'll cover the daunting passive tree later in the video. but everyone can use every skill in the game. With the wide range of options, there should always be a build for everyone. If you enjoy melee, there are plenty of melee builds to choose from. Want to spin around like a madman killing everything in your path? There's a skill for you. Want to throw lightning like a Sith Lord? There's that too. There are many options. The bosses in Path of Exile are some of the best bosses I have fought. The endgame bosses are all great fun. I still remember fondly the first time I killed Uber Elder.
They kept going back, over and over, again and again. There was something inside them that could never be satisfied. They sought more power, more prestige. They sought to rule and conquer those strange lands. Each time they returned, I feared more and more what they were becoming.
There are a lot of progression systems in Path of Exile, so I won't have time to cover them all. Most of the progression systems that were added from leagues I won't cover as there are just too many. This is one of the major upsides and downsides of Path of Exile, just so much content. The main progression is your level. You gain experience from killing monsters and doing side objectives. When you level up, you receive a passive skill point that you can spend on the daunting skill tree. Now I'm going to be silent for a moment and show you the passive tree. It is truly something to behold. As you can see, there is a huge amount of choice on where to go on the tree, and I will say that to get the best experience out of Path of Exile, you either need to plan out your build beforehand or find a build online you like and copy it. Path of Exile can be a tough game, and you do need some sort of viable build to progress the endgame content. Currency is another form of progression in Path of Exile. Even if you're playing solo self-found, you will need to grow your currency to help craft your items later on. The endgame progression I will cover in the endgame section, but there are passive trees for the Atlas of Worlds now which you can build to your own liking. You can cater your mapping experience to what activities you like with the choices you make on your Atlas progression. There are a huge selection of items, and sometimes enemies drop too many items. GGG have tried to change this in recent years by introducing a smart drop system for some activities, so less items drop but with more impactful stats. Path of Exile has the familiar colour scheme for items you're probably familiar with now: white, blue, yellow and orange, which shows which rarity the items are. The higher the rarity, the better the items in most cases. Unique items are items that drop with specific stats and normally can't be crafted in any way. However, this does change on a league by league basis. Most builds will incorporate some unique items as they are very powerful. However, with crafting, you can build rare items that surpass uniques. Crafting in Path of Exile is an interesting topic, as there are plenty of people who love how complicated the crafting is, and then there are those that hate it. The good thing about Path of Exile is that there are a lot of third-party websites and programs that can help you with things such as crafting. However, that in itself is a problem. To get the most out of Path of Exile, you either need to do a lot of homework to learn the ins and outs of all the crafting systems, or you need access to third-party sites. One thing I like in games is chase items. These are items that drop from specific content, but are hard to get, but when you do get them, they are normally very powerful. Now, Path of Exile has moved back to this system somewhat in recent years, by bringing build-defining items to endgame bosses. They have always had chase items that are random drops, but for me, I don't count that as a chase item as you aren't farming for it specifically. If it can drop from every enemy in game, you're just playing the game and hoping it drops.
Eons ago, my kind walked the molten surface of this world. Now, we seek a champion. You must endure the heat of the crucible. forge weapons unlike any Raycast has ever seen.
Leagues are very important to Path of Exile and are the main reason for its success lasting so long. Every 3 months a new league is introduced. These started off very weak back in the day, but leagues these days are normally very well done. For instance, the current league, Crucible, introduces passive trees to weapons, which can really empower your character. The league seems to be a huge success when it comes to player numbers. However, it is probably my least liked league in recent years. I ended up skipping the league mechanic entirely after getting the weapons I needed. People will all have their favourite and least favourite leagues. My favourite league may have been Legion. I really enjoyed that mechanic, but I did also enjoy Delve quite a lot. When a league ends normally, the league mechanic will be put into the main game in some way, unless the league was hated or didn't work in some way. As leagues happen every 3 months, GGG normally also buff and nerf skills, refreshing the game for everyone. In recent leagues, they have also added something to the endgame each time, which is great for people like me who find themselves playing a lot.
But the Atlas of Worlds remains a beacon for eldritch horrors. We imprisoned the Elder. We placated the Maven. We've been preparing for the arrival of another, but we never expected Thor. They embody insatiable hunger, crushing darkness, searing flame, merciless wrath. If we don't stop them, they will consume everything. This is a war for our very existence.
Path of Exile is without doubt the game with the largest amount of endgame content available. Not including the map bosses, there are at least 15 to 20 endgame bosses and sub-bosses, and each one feels different. Some are mechanically heavy fights and some more simple, but they are all still fun fights. With leagues adding something different every few months, the content will just continue to grow. The main system that the endgame is built around is the Atlas of Worlds, a mapping system that goes from Tier 1 maps to Tier 16 maps. Along the way, you'll encounter a lot of different endgame bosses, such as the Maven and the Eater of Worlds, and some old favourites such as the Elder. When you enter the Atlas, you'll start by completing some of the Tier 1 maps. As you play more maps, higher Tier 1s will drop. These will allow you to play the higher tier, and so on and so on. The league mechanics are all normally built around doing activities in maps you run, which further refreshes the mapping experience for players and is a genius way of making old content feel new. The entire endgame of Path of Exile is very hard to beat by any other game. I think Last Epoch is the closest to it currently, and in a couple of years it will be interesting to see both endgames put against each other. Currently though, Path of Exile has so many options for the endgame that it really has no equal. One aspect I did want to cover that I normally don't is the new player experience, as it is something a lot of Path of Exile players have talked about over the years. The best way I thought to do this was to ask my child, who just recently got into playing Path of Exile, and ask them what they thought of the new player experience. They had previously played Path of Exile a year or two ago for about an hour, so in reality this was a fresh playthrough. This time they had currently got to the start of Act 5 and had played for roughly 12 hours. Now I do need to give a little context here. They are currently level 55 at the start of Act 5, which I believe is a level 41 zone, so they do massively overlevel the content. They told me they didn't follow any build guides and just tried the skills they were offered by NPCs till they found ones they liked. They found having an army of minions was something they really enjoyed. The passive tree was very daunting for them, but instead of spending too much time looking into it, they just spent points where they felt like it. I was worried that the difficulty of the early acts would be a problem, but they found the game pretty easy, they said, and have enjoyed just playing the game and exploring. Another issue I expected was the lack of storage. As my main account, I own every stash tab and would struggle without them now. They were playing on a fresh account, so I only had the normal ones you get. From the answers I got, it seems that the game may be a lot more new player friendly than I expected. I do think that explaining more to the player would help, but my kids seem to be managing just fine. I have a love-hate relationship with Path of Exile. I have to address some of the recent changes GGG have made to the game, such as arch nemesis monsters. It seems like for a long while that GGG was trying to make the basic game much harder, which is something nobody asked for. For me, I like my general hour-to-hour ARPG gameplay to be pretty simple and have hard content available to do when you want to. ARPGs are meant to be grinded out and played for hours upon hours. When farming becomes stressful, those hours and hours of playing become shorter and shorter. I hope going forward that GGG stops with these changes, introduce hard content for endgame bosses etc, but leave the basic gameplay to be chill and relaxing, as it should be. Now, with those negatives aside, Path of Exile may be my most played game ever. Only 2 games that could come close was my first MMO, Legend of Mir, and World of Warcraft. But in recent years, it is easily my most played game. The sheer amount of content available for Path of Exile makes it really hard to beat in the ARPG genre. Even if you hate half the content, there is still more content in the other half than most other ARPGs. Choice is always something I favour highly in my reviews, and the number of different build options and progression options in Path of Exile is truly staggering. So, to answer the question, is Path of Exile the best ARPG ever? Currently, yes it is. Does it have problems? Sure. But do the pros hugely outweigh the cons? Of course they do. The game is just so much fun and gives the player everything they could ask for from an ARPG. That the game refreshes itself every few months with leagues just adds to how good Path of Exile is. The only place in this tier list Path of Exile can go is the top of S tier. I truly don't know if there is another game that can dethrone Path of Exile from the top of S tier. Perhaps Diablo 4 or even Path of Exile 2. The crazy thing is, I don't think it will be another game that will dethrone Path of Exile. My fear is that the only game that can remove Path of Exile from the top spot is Path of Exile itself. The choices GGG makes over the coming months with the Diablo 4 launch will be very interesting to watch. Thanks for watching, and if you have an ARPG you would like me to look at, leave it in the comments below.